You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
And I'm looking forward to our first House Call edition of the weekend. We've got 3 great questions coming in and 3 more coming tomorrow. So let's get right into it today. So the first question today is from Tim. Tim's asking, it's actually a follow-up from a previous post that I did on should you do an intestinal cleanse. That was on episode 137. It was a Weight Loss Wednesday. Do tune into that if you haven't listened to it before, where I kind of go through the type of cleanses that I believe that are safe to do, that have shown to be very effective as well, and what ingredients should be in those specific cleanses. All right, which is obviously is different than a detox. Remember, a cleanse is removing everything from the bowels, everything from the intestines. So that's when you have, the loose stool and you're making sure that you get everything out. But a detox is something completely different. A detox is where you're really purifying, cleaning the blood by improving liver function, because the liver is what filters all of the blood. So you improve what's essentially phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification. You're doing an elimination diet at the same time, and you're decreasing inflammation, you're regulating blood sugar, all that great stuff. Now, so again, both are fantastic, but a detox and cleanse are very, very different. Okay, so Tim is asking, who should not do a cleanse? So meaning like, all right, I didn't mention that on the episode, so it's a great follow-up question. There is never an all-for-one protocol, supplements, nutrition plan, diet plan, exercise plan. There's always those contraindications. Like on Instagram yesterday, a really popular post on how turmeric, curcumin, has been shown now to actually kill cancer cells. Like really amazing stuff. So I did a post on that. And someone mentioned that as a blood thinner, and so you have to be careful as well if you're on some type of anticoagulant. And I said you are absolutely correct, that no matter what the herb, what the food, whatever it might be, there's always a contraindication, no matter what, no matter how great the product, like something like curcumin or turmeric. And for turmeric, just as an example, if you are pregnant, you're not going to want to use it. If you have diabetes, it helps lower blood sugar, so you're going to want to just be careful. You might have to lower your insulin dosage or whatever you're taking. If you're on a blood thinner, you'll have to watch that as well and speak with your PCP about that. If you have any type of biliary, so like gallbladder-based issues, you might check in with your PCP about that as well. Now, for everyone else, it's perfectly acceptable. So for 99.9% of the population, or let's just say 99% of the population, it'll be okay. But again, there's always contraindications. Just keep that in mind. So, and again, so when I'm talking in the show, I'm never talking in absolutes. That's a very important thing. All right, so when Tim asks, who is it not good for? Well, an intestinal cleanse, so meaning like cleaning out the intestines, it would not be good for someone that has Crohn's, colitis, diverticulitis, someone who's having diarrhea or loose stool on a daily basis. So if you're already having loose stool, now that doesn't mean that you're not constipated, because it actually can mean that you're constipated. Keep in mind that some people have 3, 4, 5 bowel movements a day, but it's just loose stool, and when I actually push or palpate on their colon, I can feel that it's impacted still. So meaning that they're emptying the inner part, like the very middle of the intestines, but the outer part of the intestines still have stool or feces, attached to them. So an intestinal cleanse still could be great for them, but they should work with a health practitioner at that point. And now here's the other part to it. So the intestinal cleanse that we recommend, you'll see it just online at stephencabral.com at the store. And you'll see that it's a part 1 and part 2. Now, part 1 is the laxative. That helps you to make sure that you're having 3 bowel movements per day. Really important that during the intestinal cleanse that you're removing everything out. Now, the second part is a powder, and that powder has bentonite clay and activated charcoal. those are the items that pulls the stuff off the side of the intestines. So if you're someone that's having loose stool on a daily basis, you might not need a laxative, of course, right? But you could greatly benefit from the activated charcoal and the bentonite clay. So do keep in mind, things can be customized for each person. Tim, hopefully that answers your question. Greg is up next. Greg is asking, I do intervals twice a week, interval training twice a week. So for exercise, meaning he does some sprints, then he cools down a little bit, and then sprints, and he cools down again. And he takes NSAIDs or some type of Tylenol or ibuprofen a half hour prior to decrease inflammation. What are your thoughts on this? So my thoughts are this, Greg, is that you have some type of underlying inflammatory issue that should be dealt with rather than masking that with ibuprofen or Tylenol. And I say that because I worry not about your joints, you using that as an anti-inflammatory, but I worry that that inflammation could move from the joints into something larger, meaning like it'll stay in the joints, but what if it leads to something like cardiovascular disease because of constriction of the arteries? What if it leads to an autoimmune-based process or migraine or just something greater? So that's what my question to you, Greg, would be. And then even before that, why don't we look to use something a little bit more natural with far less side effects? So just let's take ibuprofen, for example. That's going to affect the kidneys. It's going to wipe out a lot of good bacteria in the gut, and it's also going to increase gut permeability, which means it's going to cause leaky gut. That's not a good thing at all. And Tylenol, that's not safer either. We're talking about a blood thinner. We're talking about something that can thin the blood in the organs as well and lead to internal type bleeding, and it affects the liver. And it basically shuts down a lot of the glutathione production, which is the main antioxidant that helps kill cancer cells and a lot of other things. So I don't like any of those anti-inflammatories on a more regular basis. So first, start with a higher EPA-based omega-3 oil, and that is anywhere between 2 and 3 grams per day to start. That's a great anti-inflammatory. You'll do that on a daily basis. And you can also try something like turmeric, and I just mentioned turmeric. And if you don't have any of the issues that I said were contraindicated for that, you could try that as a natural ibuprofen, and that's how turmeric essentially works, as a COX enzyme inhibitor, which is just a fancy term for saying it helps cut down on some of those inflammatory processes. Greg, try that out. Let me know how it works, and then look into why or what your inflammation levels are. Like you could do an omega-3 test. That's a pretty good thing to do, and that's a simple little blood stick or finger stick, and then you put some drops of blood on the card. Again, you can just go to StephenCabral.com and you can see the omega-3 test that I recommend. Phenomenal test. It can customize the amount of omega-3s you're supposed to take, show your inflammation levels between omega-6 and omega-3s. I love data. I love labs, and so, of course, check that out if it makes sense for you. But in my opinion, look at those underlying causes, look at those underlying reasons, and then from a biomechanical standpoint, just make sure your body's in good alignment so that it's not your form, it's not your body's alignment that's actually causing this inflammation maybe in your knees when you're running. All right, let's look at our last question for the day. Our last question is coming in from Alexandra A. All right, and Alexandra's question is, what are the side effects of birth control? So I believe at least one of the physicians she's working with, I believe, was recommending birth control to her as a way of regulating her menstrual cycle. So just right off the bat, I look at, okay, a dysregulated menstrual cycle is, again, a sign of something else. What else is going on? Why isn't the cycle regular? And typically it's this. And again, I work with fertility, I work with menstrual cycle-based issues all the time. And what we're looking at is, this is the biggest reason, and it's some type of stressor in the body, whether it be viruses, whether it be gut-based issues, whether it be work, life, family-based stress. One of those things is causing larger amounts of fight or flight, larger amounts of cortisol production. And if you look at the biochem chart or just your hormone chart, you can see that progesterone is directly above cortisol, which means it's the raw material to help feed into cortisol. So if your body's very stressed, it says, okay, we need to produce more cortisol. We need to produce more fight or flight. What do we need? Well, we need some of that progesterone right above it so it flows down into make cortisol, which is part of the survival response. It will give up some progesterone to make sure that it survives, okay? So what happens is you're left with estrogen, usually at normal levels, but then what happens is estrogen actually looks dominant in terms of estrogen-progesterone balance because estrogen's normal and progesterone is low. So you have this higher level of estrogen, which can then lead to things like weight gain, mood, depression, acne, all sorts of everything you could think of with PMS-based symptoms. You can look at that, spotting, you name it. So that's what I would look at first, right? I would look at a adrenal stress panel or a comprehensive cortisol panel, whatever you'd like to call it. You're just looking at your cortisol production. You're looking at DHEA, testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone. It's the same exact test. And you want to do it 5 to 7 days before day 1 of your menstrual cycle. So if you take the test on that day, and you'll just do it based on your cycle, whether it's 26, 28, 30 days. And you'll find, what are your levels? Do you have estrogen dominance? Do you have low progesterone? And you'll just look at it. And again, you'll be working with a practitioner whenever you run this test. If you run it with us, you'll be working with myself and the nutritionist at my practice to go through those results. But let's go through it now if you don't run that test. Here are the side effects of birth control. So birth control, I'll go through it right now. But so birth control can cause nausea, it can cause digestive-based issues, a lot of bloating in some women after meals especially, tenderness in the breasts. It can cause headaches. It can be a cause of migraines. Very few people look into that it can be a cause of that because of the hormone imbalance. It can cause weight gain, mainly through water retention. And so we see a lot of people that kind of look puffy. And that's an improper balance of, again, estrogen and progesterone. There can be much more cases of depression or kind of like low mood. I see decreased libido, and that's in my practice quite a bit. Sometimes it's just during certain parts of the menstrual cycle during the month, and sometimes it's just low the whole time. And that goes along with that mental depression as well. So you have sexual depression, you have mental depression, kind of physiological and psychological. There's often vaginal discharge, and this goes into my bigger point. And the reason is I see a lot of women in my practice, and what happens is the birth control actually throws off their gut flora, and they start to grow more bad bacteria rather than positive bacteria, and it allows for a greater amount of candida, a greater amount of yeast. And when that happens, a lot of women don't realize this, but vaginal-based flora is shared with the intestinal-based flora. And so what's thrown off in the intestines is thrown off in the vaginal canal as well. And so that's really important to look at, because when you're trying to deal with just like taking like diflucan or, some pharmaceutical drug, that's fine to take, fine, acute-based circumstance every once in a while. But I would never use that in my practice. That's because it's not looking at why it was there in the first place. So really important to look at those specific things. Those are just some of the side effects. Of course, I always recommend everyone do a little research on their own, see if it's the best choice for them, and then make the best choice based on what they need. Like maybe taking birth control is the only thing that makes sense, right? Maybe you do need some form of a contraceptive. So just know that. Start to maybe supplement with some good lactobacilli by strains ahead of time, maybe some Saccharomyces boulardii ahead of time. Just make sure you're reducing stress levels, that you might be taking like ashwagandha or something that kind of like calm those cortisol levels. So again, look into all these things, look at your best options, and remember, it's your body. You're the one who ultimately gets to decide what's best for you. All right, hopefully that answers your question, and thank you everyone for tuning in to another Cabral Concept.
Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or imbalanced in only 2 ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stephencabral.com/rainbarrel.